sign here?
Do I need mine?
No, thank
Okay. Ah.
Let me see, Ray. The snake.
Oh,
Oh.
if only we knew what we were doing
Is
now.
that a
We're
new
set
one?
up, but we don't know
No,
what
I've
we're
had it for
doing.
many, many years.
Because my family had one just
Oh
like
wait, I
this.
have
Really?
to wait. I have to get something
It
that's
was
signed.
Not two.
The
But
guidelines we're
this-
following.
Yeah.
Little snake head.
Actually, this ring was given to me by my babysitter. She was 80-some years old by the time she gave this to me. My family lived sort of diagonally across the street from my babysitter. And she just loved us, my brother and myself. My sister wasn't even born yet. And she had married the
I think-
son of
This is a perfect story.
the Myers family that lived where Ned Harrington used to live. That's where the Myerses lived. And she was from Kentucky, and she had been a fashion model back in the 1890s. And so she married into this wealthy Myers family. And she loved her mother-in-law very much. I think she called her Memsy. And after her husband committed suicide up in the social hall, that property was the Normal Institute.
Right.
And there was a social hall there, and her husband went out into the social hall and shot himself, I think. So at any rate, the family, you know, I guess it had too many unhappy memories, and so they sold the place. And Lillian, her name was Lillian Meyer, she had no place to go. So she and Mamsie moved into Stella Hunsberger's, the wooden part of her house down here on the corner. And so my mother asked her, I guess, could you babysit the two boys? And so that's what happened. And then years and years passed, and she moved into a house up Aquatone Road here. And that lady died, and again, she had no place to go. And so my brother and I said to our parents, can't Miss Lillian come and live with us? And they were shocked, and they said, well, somebody's going to have to share a bedroom. But that they acquiesced and let her come to live with us, and she spent her last days living with us. And before she died, she gave me this ring. And she said, now don't you dare ever give that to any girl. It's for you. So I've had it ever since.
What a perfect reason.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful story, and let's go back to the introduction, and then we can go
Yeah.
into that because that's lovely. So let me know when you want me to start with the introduction. Okay? Today is the 16th of January, 2019. My name is Phyllis Haldeman, and I am the treasurer of the board of the Historic Carversville Society. And with me is Suzanne Crilly, in whose house we are, Howard Barsky, another board member of Historic Carversville, will be recording the interview, and Bob Kling, who has agreed to share his remembrances of growing up in Carversville and the history and changes in the village. And Bob has just shared with us a charming story about his babysitter, which illustrates, if you would go through it again, and then we'd like to start at the beginning, which is you're one of the oldest families in the village.
We actually probably have that.
That's what I was
Story,
hoping.
yeah.
You have that
Yeah.
already
Oh, we do.
on tape. That's good.
So if we could stop for 1 sec. Okay.
Okay. I guess, Bob, can we start at the beginning? Can you?
Well, first, fellas, how about if we just include in this tape that we are basing our discussion today on the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, their interviewing guide. And they've been doing this for decades, so may we be as successful as they have been.
Bravo.
Yeah.
So can we start in the beginning with
With the list you gave me in the mail?
with where your family name? Well, introduce yourself with your full name.
Here's my proper glasses to read. I only briefly looked at this because I wanted to be spontaneous.
You will wait very shortly.
Oh, that's an interesting thing. I didn't realize you had my name wrong.
Oh,
My name is Lawrence Robert Kling. I was named for my mother's younger brother, Lawrence Robert Weddell. And my birthday is October 4th, same as Sue's,
different year.
1945. Born in Doylestown Hospital and brought back to Carversville, where my parents rented a house on Carversville Road, and I don't know who lives there now. Somebody from Brooklyn, I think, lives there.
Which house?
Oh dear. Okay, it would be two doors down from the last house, going out Carversville Road on the right. The last old house on the right. Count two back from that, and that's where I was brought home to that house. My parents rented that. They were later given the house here on Aquatone Road by my grandparents. So they moved from that house to this one. And
Are you the oldest child?
yes, I'm the oldest child of three. So, and my mother told me that when she was working in the garden or something there, at that house they rented, she was either in the house or in the garden, but there was a knock at the door, and a woman was carrying me. I was a baby, carrying me, and she said, "I believe this child is yours. I just found him in the middle of the road." So I had crawled out of the house, I guess, or walked out of the house, and I was playing in the middle of the road.
Oh, Robert.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad she found you.
Yes.
Before there was traffic on the road.
That's right. You used to be able to count on two hands the number of cars that traveled through Carversville in a day.
But now the house you lived in when they moved into the Aquatone Road
Mhm.
and bought the house, is that Todd Broad's house?
That's Todd Broad's house now. Mm-hmm.
I
That's
see.
right, yeah. And my grandparents owned that house. And when my grandmother Kling's parents, the Barron family, died, they moved into the Carversville Inn, which the Barrons owned, and gave that house to my parents. Yeah,
Where does your name come from, Kling?
Yeah.
it's German. It's a German name.
And so your great-grandparents came here or way back?
My great-grandparents came from Springtown, and they were part of a large family. And the Barrons, when they moved from Springtown, bought the farm on Green Hill Road which they called Walnut Farm because of the walnut trees on the property. Who I don't even know who owns it now, but it's the property where the road, sort of Green Hill Road, goes one way, and the what is it?
Mechanicsville?
Not Mechanicsville Road. Sugan Road.
Sugan.
Yes.
I know what
Yeah,
you mean.
yeah.
Oh, so
It's a horse farm now. It's a horse farm. That
So
was,
it's still an intact property.
yeah, it is. It is. With the
Okay,
power line running through it, of course, unfortunately, but
Now, so you said that your grandparents, that, well, ultimately back, were German.
mm-hmm.
About when would they have come to this country? Have you any idea?
No, I do not know. I do not know.
They may have come with the Hessians in the Revolution.
I don't know, but I just learned recently that my mother's family, the Weddles, they were here very early in the 18th century, and I didn't know anything about them at all until Edie and I, this past summer,
Edie is your present wife.
my wife, Edie. We took a trip down to North Carolina and stopped in Virginia on the way, and there was a very tiny little museum there. I didn't even know where I was, but we went into the museum, and it was all about a wilderness trail that used to go through Virginia, which I'd never heard of. And there was a lot of information about the mills that stood on the creeks in that valley there. And so I said to the girl that was showing us around, I said, I have a question. Do you know a name that I think came from this area by the name of Weddle? And
Would you
she
spell that?
Weddle.
W-
And she sort of caught her breath and went like this, and said, oh my God, she said, I am a Weddle. And I said, how amazing. And I said, do you know where the Weddle mill is that my great-grandfather built? And she said, I know exactly where it is. It's only 3 miles from here, but she said, I can't take you there because I've got another commitment here. But she said, if you could ever come back again, she said, I will take you there. And she said, it's in ruins. But she said, follow me. And she took Edie and I upstairs, and she said, all of these books and boxes, this is all Weddle family history. So now I know that the Weddles came to America from Germany in the probably very early 18th century through the port of Philadelphia. From there went to Lancaster County, and from Lancaster County to Virginia. And my grandfather Weddle, my mother's father, was born in Virginia, and after his father died in, I think it was 1918, he moved north and brought his mother with him, who was somewhat of a difficult woman to live with, but at any rate, she came with him, and I guess lived with my grandmother and grandfather Weddle for a while, and she criticized my grandparents for living beyond their means because they set the table with silver and china.
Oh. Now, they would have moved north for
Economic reasons, yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
So let's take us to your parents, and they are doing what in Carversville?
Oh, when my father came back from Second World War, his parents said to him, I guess you're going to want to take over your grandparents' general store, which was in the Carversville Hotel. And my father said, I want no part of that. And so they asked him what he would like to do, and he said, I would like to make furniture and restore antique furniture, but I have no place to do it. And the only available space was the shop I once had in where the general store now is upstairs. I had my shop there, and that was a music hall or dance hall, a social hall.
A social hall.
My great grandfather turned the upstairs of that big barn into a great big dance floor with a stage for plays and so forth.
And it was for the community.
It was for the community.
Your grandfather did that?
My great grandfather.
Great grandfather.
Yeah, the Barons bought the Carversville Hotel,
Which is now the Carversville Inn.
Carversville Inn, about, I think, around 1920. Before that, he lived in the Millhouse Apartments, which was right next door to the mill down here. And
Is that now the Oddfellows Hall? Or
no,
is that what Joe Santoro's house?
Joe Santoro's house. That my great grandparents rented that because my great grandfather operated the mill for the Stover family. And then when the hotel, which was known as the Benner Hotel at the time, when it became available about 1920, I believe, that's when my great grandfather bought it. And he maintained the bar, but where the present owners now have a dining room, that was turned into a grocery store. And you could go up to the third floor of the hotel and buy pots and pans and work clothes and work boots and that sort of thing.
And the
So,
second floor was?
third floor. The second
Whoa.
floor was where my great-grandparents lived. That's where they lived,
And that's where the apartments
are
are
now.
now.
Mhm. And that's where my father was born, in the Carversville Hotel, in 1920.
That what has always amazed me reading the histories, the various histories of the town, the village, is the amount of moving from one house to another, purchasing them, renting them. You know, people nowadays, when they move, they usually move to another part of the country.
Yeah,
And here they just moved within.
around, yes.
Yes. Is that because they earn their living, their livelihood within the village?
I believe so. I believe that's the truth. I'm related to the Hendricks family. My maternal grandmother was a Hendricks, and also a German name. And she used to tell me, well, the family used to live here. I was born in this house, and there's a house down on Fleecydale Road or Old Carversville Road, and one of my brothers was born in that house. The Hendrickses moved around, and
This is Hendricks Appliances in Stockton.
yes, we're related to them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Have you ever done a family tree, Robert?
I started it, and then my cat ate the papers, and I never went back to it. Chewed them to pieces.
Didn't like that idea.
But more work has been done by other members of the family, which I need to get in touch with and get it written down for myself. Because I try to explain to Edie, you know, this person is a cousin, this person is a cousin, this person is a cousin, and at least a third of the people buried in the cemetery up here are relatives, and it's difficult for her to understand how could I be related to so many people.
Right.
But we stayed in the area. We just stayed in the area.
So there are within this village several family names that are foundation names for the
Yes.
village.
Livesey?
Livesey?
Yeah, Livesey, well,
It
the
sounds like
Livesey's
it's
is more,
a new
they were
color.
Solbury.
Okay.
There's an ancient house in Solbury, and that's where the Livesey's lived. But they emigrated here from Philadelphia because there's a historic museum in the Wissahickon Valley. It's called the Livesey House. Yeah.
And it's a mill, I believe. And
Is it a mill?
there's a Livesey
Okay.
Lane that goes down
Yes, there is a Livesey.
down to the Wissahickon.
Yes.
Right.
hmm Yeah,
Interesting.
same family.
And I asked Walt at one point about that, and he said, "Yeah, that was the other branch of the family."
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah.
Not your family.
No,
I'm related to the Livseys through blood. The Livseys were not my direct bloodline, but Walter Livesey Sr. married my grandmother Weddell's sister. So that's how all the Livseys are now my
Yeah.
cousins.
but you mean Junior?
No, there was a Walter Livesey Sr. that married my Aunt Marjorie, and they had Walter Jr., and they had Walter III, and Walter III has Walter IV.
Which one lived where Claire Harrington now lives? Livesey the third?
Third.
Okay.
That's who lived there.
Okay.
But we digress.
Now, what united the social activities? Was it a common church that people went to?
It was the church, and it was there was what was called the Literary Society, and they met in the social hall up on the hill where Ned Harrington used to live. The big school was still standing at the time, but it was no longer a school. It was an orphanage, and there was as I explained earlier, where Mr. Meyer committed suicide. That was a social hall, and they held plays there, and they met to discuss books and recite poetry, and my grandmother Weddell, while still a Hendricks, was one of the
Founders?
not, I don't think a founder, but she was one of the attendees, and she played the piano, and her other two sisters sang duets. So
Delightful.
yeah.
Now, reading books and poetry seems to be a unifying theme throughout history. There is now this new movie that Netflix has out called the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society.
Oh my goodness, it's the
And it
same
was-
idea.
It's the same idea, and it happened to be a unifying group where the Germans were occupying the Channel Islands,
Mm-hmm.
and the people had no way to get together except by forming this literary society so that they could exchange ideas
Mm-hmm.
and culture,
Mhm.
etc. So,
Well, even though this was truly the country, very rural, I was pleasantly stunned to have learned that William Byrd, who owned a house further up Aquatong Road, opposite McNeil Road,
on Carversville.
on Carversville Road.
Right.
Carversville Road. He was a farmer. His family owned a big farm on McNeil Road, and when he was farming, with a horse pulling the plow, whilst he was walking behind the horse and plow, he was reading Shakespeare. So we were not, simple bumpkins out here. We were literate people. And
We're talking about literate people. Where did the children go to school?
Well, my grandmother grandmother Kling. Grandmother Kling attended the school on Green Hill Road, which is, it's been converted to a house now, and it's been given the French name L'École for the school.
Oh, you know where it is. Yeah.
And then there was the one at Kirk's Corner, up at the corner of Sawmill Road and Aquatone Road. That's where people went. That was a schoolhouse, which is now a house. And then there was a schoolhouse in Cottageville, which is now a house as well. So there were little one-room schoolhouses all around, and that's where people went to school.
And they went to school depending on which was closest.
That's right, which was closest, because you had to walk to school.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it was 2 miles away, you walked to school.
Was there any mandatory years that you had to be in school, or?
I doubt it. I think my grandfather Weddell said that he only went to the 8th grade and then went to work. That's what you did.
Uh-huh.
So I think there was probably no mandatory period of time that you were required to be in school. I could be wrong, I don't know. Don't know that far back.
Were both the churches in the village active when you were growing up?
No. No, I think the Presbyterian Church folded around 1920 or 1921.
Was that the stone?
The Stone, yeah,
Building was
the
down.
smaller of the two churches. They had been active for quite a while. Naturally, the big one that I attend that's been active since 1837.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the other one was built in 1875 or 6 or something like that.
And only lasted until the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
It was Presbyterian.
Presbyterian.
Interesting. Okay.
Because the other church, the older church, was originally called the Free Meeting House, and the Presbyterians were, because it was the free meeting house, they could preach and have a service every other Sunday in the big church. And then some of the Presbyterian members said, why don't we build our own church and we can meet every week
Right.
in the same building. So
Was the cemetery ever affiliated with either of the churches?
no, it's a separate entity
No, it wasn't.
altogether.
and used by the entire community?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
How far does that date back? I have no idea.
I think it was incorporated in 1850s, I believe. So that's rather recent,
Was-
as cemeteries go.
Mm.
Yeah.
Was that a common, was cemeteries shared commonly at that time? It seemed always to me that a cemetery was attached to a church, and here it didn't
was
seem
not.
to be.
Mm-mm. No. Well, the land, I think, was given for the cemetery as an afterthought. So it just became a separate entity altogether, not affiliated with either church,
And used by both.
and used by both. Yeah. Yeah.
And was there, now in Carversville, there are weekenders who come from away and spend time here. Was the community, when you were growing up, always a full-time living in community?
Yes, for the most part, they were not weekenders. They bought houses here and they lived in them full time.
And worked around.
That I don't know. I think some of them went into the cities to work, but this was their residence, as I understood it.
How was transportation? There's a question in here about what things, where you went for things that weren't available in Carversville.
Like a drugstore
Oh,
or
no.
a hospital or a
Yeah,
doctor.
you went to Doylestown, or I remember reading William Byrd's diary when he was a young man, and he mentions going to New Hope or even Lambertville.
Mm.
So I think people considered, especially Lambertville, as a city almost, and
Well, it is.
it is a city, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it was an industrial center.
And they traveled by car.
No, he traveled by horse and buggy then, but yes, later people would travel to Doylestown or New Hope or Lambertville. My maternal grandparents always bought their clothes in Lambertville. Always. There was a very fine clothing store there, and that's where they went. But yes, when I was growing up, it was strictly automobiles, and Mother would go grocery shopping in Doylestown, and banked in Doylestown, and went to the doctors in Doylestown.
But there was always a general store in the village where you could buy
Yes.
needle and thread or toothpaste.
Where Howard Barsky is now, that was a very good grocery store. You could buy flour, sugar, cereal, canned goods. I mean, it was pretty complete.
Shoes?
Not shoes.
Okay.
No.
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 You had to go to Fred and Lambertville.
Lambertville was a center for making rubber boots. And
I didn't know that.
so you probably got shoes there too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see what else we want to find out. Okay. Talking about, when did this oyster pork dinner begin? And if you know,
1871.
you do know. And what about your family recipes? Do you have traditional German recipes in your family?
No, I don't. Both of my grandmothers were superb cooks, especially my grandmother Kling. Her mother used to host the horse company dinners down at the hotel.
The horse company.
It was, and don't ask me what it was about, I don't know. I think it was just a social club, but it was called the Horse Company. And she had a long walnut extension table in the dining room where the fireplace is now in the Carversville Inn. That was her well, they tore down the partition that separated the fireplace. That was her kitchen. And there was this small dining room, and when she stretched out this walnut table, someone had to sit in the window wells at each end.
Was that long?
It was that long. It was that long. I may still have some of those walnut leaves.
That you do?
But she was an excellent cook, and that's where my grandmother, I'm sure, learned much of what she used to make. In fact, that's where I gained some of my favorite things to eat. She made superb sweetbreads, and they're neck glands out of the steer or the cow. They're excellent. And smelts, I loved smelts. And my grandmother had special china dishes that were sort of scimitar shaped and went at the top of your dinner plate. And that's where you put the bones when you were eating. Yeah.
Yes.
They were bone dishes.
The milk.
The milk and that was the liquid measure in the recipe for the layer cake. And
Would you repeat that last little bit? What happened with the coconut?
oh, my grandfather would with a hammer and nail make a hole in the side of the coconut so that the milk could be drained out, and my grandmother used that as
That was
the
like the
liquid
liquid
measure,
measure.
for the
Amazing.
cake recipe.
Of
And then, of
course.
course, she grated her own coconut, and it was drop dead delicious. It was wonderful. Very moist layer cake.
Oh, it sounds delightful.
Yeah.
Just to go back to your working life for a
Yeah.
minute, which came from your father, apparently. Do you have any idea where your father got this love for wood and working with wood? And
Well, he apprenticed with Porter Brothers in Doylestown, and they were on East Street, I think, originally. And they made furniture and also restored antique furniture. And I think that, that was one of his first jobs, and he really loved wood.
And wanted to go back to that.
Yeah, yeah. So,
there wasn't anything he encountered in the service?
no.
And now there isn't, now that you've retired.
That's right. That's right.
Completing a circle.
Yeah.
Can we go back a little earlier to talk about the children who lived in the community? Did they play together, or was...
Oh, yes. Oh, my God. There were many of us, and because there was very, very little traffic running through Carversville, we could sled down the hill here into the square. We could pack snow and make it slippery, and we could sled down the hill there. There were no cars.
Beautiful.
Yeah. But we played hide and go seek in the summer every night. I mean, our parents never had to worry where we were. We were
Out.
out.
Did you fish? Did you fish in the creek or in? Was
No.
Carversville very connected to the Delaware River?
Only that the Ponacussing flows into it, I think, but no. I know my stepdad and probably my father too. Ice skated on the canal, so you could.
Which went back to the 1830s, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
But I just wondered if there was any commerce between here and taking wagons of things from here down to the canal. The canal that
That
when
I
you were
don't-
growing up was not any longer
Not any
functioning as
functioning. It was no
yeah.
longer functioning.
other than for pleasure, I guess.
Yeah.
Was it functioning on both sides of the river when it was functioning?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the mule barges would have gone up both sides
Of the
down.
river, yeah. Yeah.
And the children, can you give us a number of children that,
Oh, dear.
I mean, there were 3 in your family.
There must have been at least 20-some of us anyway, playing together at any one time. It was-
And they all got
And we had a baseball diamond down behind
the general store.
the general store.
But wait, that was a pond at one point?
Originally, yes, that was
A mill
the
pond?
mill pond.
Mhm.
The hurricane of, I think, 1888 destroyed the dam, so it drained. But that whole swampy area that you see when you drive down Fleecy-Dale Road, that was an enormous mill pond. And my grandmother Kling said that her mother and her aunt, I guess, used to go fishing for eels from a rowboat on that enormous mill pond.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Or a rowboat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they probably, if they didn't use oars, at least they used poles to transport
Push
themselves over, because it wasn't very deep.
Right.
Certainly not very deep.
Which is what they did to get things down the Delaware. They used poles, and they stuck poles. Our house is built, they call it a plank house,
Oh, yes, like my stepdad's house was plank.
and there's a hole at one
Yes,
point.
they were rafted. That wood was rafted down the river from further up in the Poconos, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what those holes are for.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So it all kind of ties together, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
and that relates to what you said. That is a direct relationship between Carversville and the river. The houses that were built here in that mid to late Victorian period, mostly later, you went down to the river to buy that wood, which was rafted down to the Tinsman Lumberyard, I guess.
I know that it's those plank houses, mine being one, is so well insulated just by the planks. It was they were thick
Yes,
and so solid.
and most of that is hemlock.
Is it?
It's hemlock. Yeah.
You need to give a class in tree identification.
And that was some a knowledge you just picked up from living.
Oh, just yes. I mean, I knew where practically every rock and special tree was located. We kids lived in the creek in the summer. Lived in it. We had many a cut foot, but we loved building dams in the creek and swimming in it, and the creek was our playground.
Was there anything that divided the community in terms of philosophy or behavior, or was it a pretty unified group?
I think it was a pretty unified group. Everyone respected each other, and I think everybody got along really well. I mean, there was it's laughable now, but to think about it, but there was a sort of a pleasant kind of rivalry between many of the older ladies in Carversville on wash day, which I believe is a Monday traditionally, who could get their laundry hung out on the line first. First. And you could, my grandmother used to say, you could hear that the McNeil family, you could hear the put 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 of their gas engine, which they had to motorize their washing machine, I guess. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So that, but it was a friendly kind of rivalry.
Sure.
But I don't know if there were any social cliques that were out trying to outdo another family.
You have a lot of musical talent in your family. Where does that come from? Do you know?
Well, one of my ancestors played the violin. My grandmother played the piano, and so did I think all of her sisters. They all learned to play the piano. My mother had a very sweet soprano voice, and she sang in the choir here in Carversville. And when she was living on the Hendricks farm in Soulbury, she attended Trinity Episcopal, and that's where my parents were married, in Trinity Episcopal Church. And she and her older brother sang in the choir at Trinity. And I sing. So.
In Trinity.
He sings up here.
Yeah.
How did your parents meet?
How did they meet? Wow. I think when my grandparents Weddell moved from the Hendricks farm in Soulbury, they moved here to Carversville. And they rented the Walton House on the corner of Carversville Road and Orphanage Hill Road, where the cast iron fence is in front now. That was where they rented. And of course my father lived right here in Carversville.
So they would have
naturally met. So I'm sure they saw each other and sort of said, "That's nice looking."
And here comes Robert.
Yeah.
You were born after World War II, but do you remember hearing about the impact that war might have had on this village?
No, I don't. In fact, when I would talk to my grandparents, they didn't want to say much about it. And my grandfather, Kling, fought in the First World War, and all he could say was, it was hell. That was his comment. And he said, it was so upsetting to see the person next to you blown to bits. He said, so he didn't talk much about it. Did not.
Was there a, because Roosevelt was during the Second World War, was there any politics discussed here?
Yeah. I can remember hearing people, well, they did not like Roosevelt. People in Carversville detested Roosevelt. But
And the reason, it was just a visceral thing, or it was because he was getting us into the war, or what?
I don't know I was a child, and so I just listened in on adult conversation. All I know is there was a lot of dislike of Roosevelt, and I don't know what it was about really, whether it was the war or whether it was finances, social policies maybe. Yeah.
Giving away all their hard-earned money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is fascinating. Can we possibly take a tea break?
Please.
Is that all right with you?
It's fine.
You've been talking and talking.
I'm getting dry, that's why I'm drinking this tea. This is so
We may
good.
have about run through our list of things to talk about, but Howard, could I get you a cup of tea?
Because this is interesting.
Well, see, this is when interesting stuff comes out. Wasn't he a doctor in the Civil War?
He wasn't. Well, he wasn't. He was an apprentice in the Civil War.
Oh, okay.
We're talking about Bishop, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And,
John Bishop, was it? Dr. John Bishop?
and he was both a dentist and a doctor. And my house, as my husband says, if you can walk up the hill as a patient, you're still alive.
That's right.
But when you came into the house, what is now our dining room was the waiting room.
Yes.
And on the other side of the staircase, the room was divided in two.
Oh.
The front part was his medical surgery,
Oh.
and the back part was his dental surgery.
Oh, dear.
And he did both.
Mm-hmm.
And the back of the house, which was, I think, built by some patients because they couldn't afford to pay him,
Oh. Mm-hmm.
so they bartered their labor
Mhm.
for it, and
Yeah.
that became the kitchen area for
Right.
the family,
Right.
another staircase going up to the living quarters upstairs, and
Mhm.
it was all, as I said, bartered.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously those were local people using
Local
those.
doctors.
Yeah, yeah.
And we did have a barber here.
In the what became the old post office.
Yes, the old post office.
On the bottom, yes,
Yes.
the barber was in the back,
That's right. Mm-hmm. And the post office was in the front.
the front.
And the barber lived in the right half of the house, which had its own separate entrance.
Right, and
so-
downstairs,
Was the
oyster
oyster
bar.
bar.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, could you elaborate on that? I don't remember that. I don't know if I've ever heard
oysters were garbage food. Everybody could get oysters on the cheap. I mean, there were oyster bars on every corner,
Really?
and it was just it was healthy, I guess, and people loved oysters. And they were eaten raw, I believe. And there was an oyster bar in that basement of that house. And there was an oyster bar, the workshop that's just been torn down, that was collapsing.
Yes.
By Stella's house?
Yes, that used to be down by
Right.
Stella's house, where her
right,
driveway
right,
is.
got
It
it.
was moved. And there was an oyster bar in there
Wasn't that
too.
an ice cream bar?
Ice cream parlor as well. And my great-grandfather made his own ice cream and glassed in the side porch that faces this Fleecy-Dale Road. And that was his ice cream parlor with, you know, wirework tables and chairs, and he sold ice cream in there.
Which would have been very important in the summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that staircase that led up to my workshop in the big barn, my great-grandfather constructed some sort of lead-lined or metal-lined chamber in there, and he kept ice in there, and that's where he kept watermelons to sell in the summer. And if somebody wanted a nice cold watermelon, he would just walk across the square and open the door and pull out a watermelon and sell it to you. It's still there.
Where is this?
The staircase that goes up to
Very
my old
broad.
shop,
It's
Yeah.
very broad.
it's a broad staircase.
Right.
And underneath the stairs, there's a door. And that was where my great-grandfather kept watermelons in the summer. Yeah.
And nothing else.
I don't, nobody told me that there was
Beer.
anything else in there. You know, but there could have been, well, I think the beer was sold from taps in the basement of the inn, so that was cool down there in the summer, but maybe cantaloupes too, I don't know. But everybody, all these houses up and down, even on this side, this creek side of Aquatong Road, everybody had a vegetable garden, and they were immaculate. Not a weed to be seen.
And they
were
took care of it
they-
themselves,
They
Suzanne.
did. They did. They did.
And they built a lot of stone walls.
Lots of stone walls. Right.
Stone walls
And
make
wells.
good neighbors.
You know,
Robert Frost.
there were wells, I guess, at all these houses.
Or cisterns. Cisterns, more likely.
Cisterns.
Where the water from the rainwater from the roof was channeled into a cistern, and then you had a pitcher pump that you pumped it up out of the cistern.
And you used it for drinking?
Mm-hmm.
Everything.
I guess you boiled it first, maybe. I don't know.
So these houses, a lot of them didn't originally have a well dug into the ground.
I don't think so. I think
Well-
they came later.
You told me that at this house, there was a stair path that went down the far side of the property.
That's right.
And there was a big hole down there.
Yes, it's still there, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I put stones in it so I wouldn't fall in and break my
Yeah,
ankle.
yeah.
Was that not a well?
I thought that was a well too, because I think when my grandparents lived here, that was,
That
I
would've
think
been a
that was a
well.
well.
Right.
Yeah, because it had a wooden top on it, I think, at the time.
Yeah, not when I was here.
Mhm. Yeah.
So there were definitely wells.
Yeah.
That cistern, I'm interested because I think also in the basement, under the addition to this house, the
Mhm.
1940s edition, I think you said,
Yes, it
when
would
the
have
kitchen
been.
and
Mhm.
bathroom were added.
Uh-huh.
In that part of the basement, I think there's what you would call a cistern.
Okay.
Sue,
Okay.
can you give us the address of this house?
3781 Aquatong Road,
Okay, but just to locate it for this.
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
the lady who made hats
Yes.
lived.
Yes. Yes.
I
and-
thought she lived in Howard's.
No.
Her show window,
Her show window
was
was in.
across from Howard in the Shaw's house.
In the Shaw's house now.
The bay
across from
window,
Howard.
The bay window
of the
in the
house,
Shaw's.
yeah, across
Yeah.
from Knoll.
Yeah, across
Across
from
from
Noel
Noel.
Barrett's.
And
Mhm.
tell us the history of Noel's house.
I don't know much about it except that it was a dry goods store and grocery store. It burned down in, I think, 1914 or something, and then the stone part survived, and they rebuilt it.
Because it has this wonderful elevator, cage elevator
That's
in the
right.
back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where would the nearest firehouse have been? Fire trucks to help extinguish
Well,
such a
yeah.
blaze.
Boy, I don't know where the nearest one would have been, but I know my great-grandfather Baron made an attempt at having some kind of a organized group of men
Right.
to
Brigade.
help put out a
Brigade.
fire. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there was water here with the creeks,
That's right.
but you needed buckets.
You needed
Or
buckets.
hoses or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when the recording was off, we were talking about the different businesses, the stores that were in town.
Yeah.
So there was one at the inn.
Yes, a
mentioned
grocery
in-
store in the inn, a grocery in your building that you own, a
We
grocery
couldn't identify
where
the
Noel
building.
Barrett lives. There's a one there.
This was all fresh, dry goods or fresh.
Mostly
thing?
dry goods, I think, and canned goods.
Greengrocers were not popular at that point.
Well, everyone had their garden.
Everyone
Didn't
did their
we?
own canning. Before there were freezers big enough to do freezing, you canned everything. You canned string beans and beets, and as well as fruits.
So now there was no store where the store is now.
Or the general store.
Oh
under
no!
your
Oh no!
business.
That was the livery stable for the inn. That was the livery stable, and when my grandfather Kling married my grandmother, I guess my grandmother's parents said, "Well, you need a job. You know, you need to be doing something to earn money." And they said, "What do you want to do?" And he was mechanically inclined, so they turned the livery stable into a garage. And my grandfather repaired cars, and gas tanks were sunk in the ground, and he pumped gas, and you could get kerosene there for your kerosene lamps in the house.
And that would have been when?
In the 20s.
And so when did electricity come to Carversville?
Dear me.
Maybe about-
It came rather late. I don't know the exact date. It probably would have been the late 20s, I'm guessing. And Pico sent an enormous crew here to put up telephone poles and the wires and so forth. And the social hall, which was later my shop and my father's shop, they slept on the floor, the dance floor up there. And
While they were working here.
while they were working in Carversville, they slept in that room.
Right?
And my great-grandmother made them every morning. She had rows of paper bags of their lunches. She made their lunches for them.
Was Pico footing the bill for this?
I guess so.
And they would use an outhouse where,
Yes, an outhouse.
I see.
Yeah. There was a two-holer under my shop.
We had one at the back of our house.
Mhm.
And
And then, in appreciation, after the wires were all installed and so forth, they presented my great-grandmother with a solid gold thimble with her initials on it and the date and Pico.
oh,
Very interesting.
and that would still be in existence in the house?
It got lost because when my grandparents passed away, I looked for it and I never ever found it. So I don't know what happened to it.
Yeah.
My grandmother treasured that thing. I think it was in a carved walnut, and you sort of twisted the walnut and you opened it up, and there was this gold
Oh,
thimble inside.
that shone out from the walnut beautifully.
Yeah.
This, I know in tracing the history of my house, which is 6134 Carversville Road, I learned from Kathy Auerbach, who did the history for my house, that this area had a lot of women homeowners. Does any of that strike a bell with you?
Well, It does, in the fact that when I was a child, there were single women owning some of these houses, but I believe only because their husbands had passed away. I mean, Addie Velder lived next to me when we were living here on Aquatone Road. Her husband was, I think, the first barber that Carversville had, and he operated a barber shop in the hotel, and then moved across the street to a little lean-to attached to the garage, and then finally set up a shop in his own house. So people moved around, as you say. And one of your questions is, where did people go for things like getting a haircut? You had it done in Carversville. And you bought groceries here, and if you needed anything special, you had to go to Doylestown or Lambertville or somewhere else.
New Hope was not a center for anything at that time?
Lambertville would have been.
Yeah, I think Lambertville would be more selective. You could have more to choose from anyway. Yeah, more commercial.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I know that my house was given to, I think her name was Lizzie Bishop,
Okay.
by her parents.
Oh.
And then she married Dr. Bishop,
Oh.
but it was given
So
to...
he was a doctor, a medical doctor, a dentist and a doctor. you said.
Dentist and a doctor.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, but I think it was originally given to her. And then, of course, when she married, it was English common law, so it became the property of the husband.
Oh.
Wasn't that
Gee, I don't know. I don't know.
to
be reviewed, researched. Yeah.
Right.
And we would be remiss if we failed to mention that most of these later Victorian houses in Carversville with the German siding, German clapboard siding, every one of them was built by Mark Hall, and where my stepdad lived, Byron Quinby, on Wismer Road. I keep thinking of Orphanage Hill Road. That was where Mark and I think her name was Phoebe. Mark and Phoebe Hall lived. He built that for himself. And then I think he had, there was a little building just above that house where he lived, which had been built as a female academy by Reverend Hunsaker. He used that for a workshop for maybe making doors or shutters or something like that. And but Mark Hall built most of these houses, and probably yours as well.
Yeah.
And the one across the street from here, he probably built that.
Being done over now?
Yeah. And then buried in the Potter's Field behind our church. So at some point, I guess, he went bankrupt, and that's where he.
So when would this have been, in the 1870s?
70s and 80s.
70s and 80s. Well,
Yeah.
could he have built this house? This was 1870s.
Mhm.
According to Ned Harrington.
It could have been, yeah. This is an 1870s house.
Mm-hmm.
Hall. His
Mark
name is Mark
Hall.
Hall.
Yeah.
Interesting.
In fact, the famous photograph of Carversville taken from the bell tower of the normal school that was up on the hill, you can see how many houses were not even in existence, and that photograph was taken in 1869, and this house is not here. It's just not in the picture. And my sister's house next door was not here.
Really. When was that built? Do you know?
About the same time this was, I think,
1870.
because that was the tinsmith shop,
Right.
Preston's tinsmith
The
shop.
man who lived here.
Yeah.
I never realized the origin of the word tinsman.
Oh, yeah. Usually surnames have a meaning.
Sure.
Even
It just-
Kling, I think, I had a client once who was German and still spoke fluent German, and he said something to the effect of, Kling, that's a knife, a German knife. So it's possible that my family, when my ancestors in Europe were metalsmiths that made cutlery.
So Klingensmith.
Yes, there you go.
Claims.
A knife maker.
Unless they're calling you Bobby Klingensmith.
Yes. In
Of
fact,
course, my grandfather was a Schneiderman. He was a tailor,
oh my.
a sewer.
Mm-hmm.
The same,
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
all of this is.
Well, I just have to say for the record, I think the whole community, and especially I miss you being in your shop in Carversville.
And I miss it too. I miss.
The camaraderie of it.
Oh, I think that
Miss the people.
yeah,
You know?
and the people miss you desperately.
Yeah.
But it was, well, the reason for you retiring was a health reason, wasn't it?
Well, it partly. I mean, my lungs are shot from sucking in all the bad fumes and dust, and my back is shot, and the building was getting to be shot. It needed everything. New wiring, new heating, new roof, new everything. And, you know,
It was time.
it was time. It was just
Yeah.
time.
But it was a lovely time in our lives to have had there when we were here.
I enjoyed it. I loved working on antique furniture.
And the people,
Yeah.
and the people who just
Mhm.
needed to visit.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I mended more than just furniture sometimes, I felt.
In this way, it was
Village
like
psychiatrist.
all general stores where people gathered around the potbelly stove.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
That was Bob's place.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
And when I think of it, I was in business longer than my father, who started the business in 1947. I was in business for 51 years in that building. It is fabulous. It really is.
Now, your brother had no desire to follow along?
Mm-mm. And he was good with wood. I mean, in high school, in his industrial arts class, he made furniture. He could do it, but he was an outdoors
You
person.
would rather be out hunting.
He would be out hunting, and he
Fishing.
just wanted to be outside all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a connection with wood because he was,
Oh, he took trees down.
he was an arborist. Or,
He's taken a
Yeah.
lot of trees down on this property.
Yeah.
And there was room for people to be indoor or outdoor people. We went through this period of industrialization where people needed to be inside, or
Mhm.
corporations
Mhm.
determined that they needed to be inside. And this was a time when people could follow what they really wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sure my brother would have suffered horribly if he had had an indoor job. Psychologically, I mean, he's not meant for it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, as a comparison, my brother and I are like night is from day, personality-wise.
Mm-hmm. When we initially started speaking with you about this project, you talked about the fact that you spent a lot of time listening to stories, being with older people.
Oh, one of my favorite things as I was walking on what's left of sidewalks here in Carversville, people practically every house had a front porch. And there was a row of rocking chairs on those porches. And people would be sitting on them, and I'd, wave at them, and then they said, well, come up and sit with us. And I loved it. I loved sitting on the porches and talking to these people who remember a lifestyle that for them really hadn't changed very much. I mean, my cousin who lived down the street next to my shop, she still had to use an outhouse because there was no indoor plumbing. And this is when I was growing up and a teenager still.
Mhm.
And she still had to use the outhouse. And there was a cistern under the house, and in her kitchen, she pumped water from the cistern to use. And she knew how to use the guttering system. There were levers that you could turn, and when you had a rainstorm, you opened it up so that the water would drain out of the gutters and into the lawn, and then you turn that handle, and after the gutters had been swept clear of debris, you turned the handle and the water was diverted to the cistern.
I never knew that.
It's very
I
interesting.
never knew that there was an actual system for that. Because now your gutters get clogged
Clogged
up
up.
with these, and you have to go up and clean them.
I do it 6 times a year on my house because I'm in the woods. So,
Uh-huh.
but
But there was a system for. Didn't say how that worked again.
well, you'd want to have a particularly heavy rain, which would flush out the gutters and wash it down the downspouts. And then there was sort of a Y-shaped, as I recall, thing, and one side of the Y flushed it out into your lawn, or maybe a rain barrel set up for the purpose. I know the McNeil family had a rain barrel. And then, when you were sure that the water was coming out pretty clean, you just turned this handle on there, and the water went into the
basement of
cistern.
house.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of these houses had cisterns, a lot
Yeah.
of them, instead of a well.
I wonder how, I know in this house 2 families lived at one time. Were many of these houses inhabited by more than one family?
The house I grew up in was that way. And a lot of these houses have, I've never quite understood it, but 2 front doors. There are 2 front doors with a section of masonry or something between. And
And one would go
One
up
would-
and one would go.
one would go into, like the house I grew up in, the left-hand door went into a smallish foyer type thing, and there was a great big square archway that led into the dining room. Then the other door to the right went into the formal living room. So
That's the way the Whitman's house now
Mhm.
functions.
Mhm.
Except one door works and one door doesn't.
Doesn't.
But the door on the right goes into the living room, and
Mhm.
the door on the left goes into a dining room.
So they had the living quarters and they had the formal quarters.
I guess if the minister was coming to visit, she came in through the
Mhm.
right-hand door and was
Mhm.
ushered into the formal parlor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, very interesting.
Oh, it is.
No. Is there, I know in our outline to you, the last question there, is there anyone else you feel would be helpful to interview for the Historic Archives of Carversville?
Well, we should have had DJ here when you were here, Bob. That would have been a very interesting interview.
Getting 2 different takes on the same
Perspective.
issue. Yeah.
Right. That would be good.
We could have you and your sister and DJ.
Oh, right, all 3 of you.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, if you want people who might have memories further back, there aren't many left here. I don't know whether Stella Hunsberger has been interviewed yet or
You
not.
talked with her, Philip.
I spoke
Did you?
with her, but
She
not
wasn't
as
very
a
forth-
formal interview.
Oh,
And I was not sure when I was getting a wish history or an exact history, because I think there were things that she wished had happened
oh.
and became part of the narrative.
Bob would be good to interview with you, Stella.
Would you be willing to speak with her? Because her history is a kind of wild one.
Well, it is. She was an AIDS child, and she married into the Hunsberger family, so she was not a native.
No, but
Carversvillian.
she lived in the woods when she was young. The family did not take care of her.
Right.
And she and her brothers and sisters lived in the woods. I remember her speaking with me about
Where?
that.
Yeah,
Stella.
I never heard that.
Where?
It seemed to be up Wismar.
But where did you think she came from?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. You said she was an AIDS child? Or
Yeah,
what do you call it?
like there's a term for people that take in orphan children. Foster.
Foster
She
child.
was a foster child.
I
but
see.
We had I think the locals used to call it AIDS.
Okay.
Not the disease AIDS,
No,
but
no. Help.
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 Okay.
And Stella had a sister, Irene, and I think we were the same age, and we did play together and took long walks together as children. Yeah. So, but I don't know as I could. I don't. I wouldn't know what to ask. And her history is probably part of it. She probably is chary of talking about. I
Maybe
don't
so.
know.
If you were there, more so.
Mhm.
Intimidator. So most of these houses, certainly on the creek side of Aquatone Road, would have had bridges across the Ponacussee.
Yeah, they probably did. So
And most of them would have had, like this house, which has, I now call it a garage, but where they kept the horse and the buggy and the hay.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side of the road, they didn't need the bridges, but they certainly needed the.
The barns. They all had barns.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. In fact, the barn for the house I grew up in was when the property next door was sold in I think around 1870 or 71. The slice that was taken out of the property where my family house was included the barn that was originally built for
For that house.
that house.
And they went to the next house.
And then a new barn was built where the present garage now sits behind Todd Broad's. I need this too.
Yeah, I wonder about, like, Woolner's house. Did some of them have garages or horse and buggy sheds up at street level?
Yes, I believe so, that don't exist anymore. Or they could have paid rent at the livery stable and kept their
Oh, down there.
equipage and horse there.
Right.
It's possible.
Right.
I'm not exactly sure how a proper livery stable even worked. I just don't know.
I don't know. I just know that the weather vane on my garage, this is maybe not interesting for this interview, but it's from a livery stable
Is it?
in Hopewell, New Jersey.
Okay.
So they were common
Mm-hmm.
livery stables.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think when I mentioned the two-holer underneath my shop, that wasn't an outhouse.
That was an in-house.
It was an in-house.
You had indoor plumbing.
Yes, indoor wooden
Well.
plumbing, yeah. And I think that's where the operator of the livery stable would have probably used that, and
It was a common
it was a
outhouse.
common
In-house.
in-house, yeah.
An excretorium.
Ooh, that's pretty
But then
good.
how did you deal with all the rooms ventilated?
Well, it was pretty. They were pretty open. I mean, it's like the garage here. It's like a piece of Swiss cheese.
Yes, you can see
It's,
daylight
it's
through
not.
it.
It's not very tight.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and the clone of this one is where my sister's garage, the back portion of that garage stands. That was a clone of this barn, as I
Oh,
understand.
interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Because
Oh,
both
I'll have to, now
both
you can
were
see
built
it.
by the Preston family, or for the Preston family.
Yeah, because now you can see it with that old ice cream parlor having collapsed there.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the other side of Ginny's house.
That's right, which is not pretty. Not pretty.
It will come around.
I'm sure everything does.
Mm-hmm.
Everything does. Yeah.
Well, have we covered the waterfront here? Are you exhausted?
Well, I'm getting dry throat.
Would you like something a little stronger than tea?
No, thank you. No. Your special teachers, who were your playmates.
So the school you went to was
Oh.
the one up?
I went to grade school in the village of Solbury, and while they were making additions to that school, I actually attended one grade in the one-room schoolhouse there on the corner.
Oh, I know.
Yes.
Did you have a school bus?
Yes,
Yeah.
we had school buses. Right.
Was that paid for by the family, or was that a community supported?
No, I think it was part of your
Public school.
your school
school
taxes. Your taxes paid for that.
So by that time, that would already have been in place.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And I guess you've noticed a slight increase in your property taxes during your lifetime in
Yes.
Solbury Township.
Oh my God! It used. I recently burned a lot of papers from 1963 alone, I look at some of the bills that I paid, and it's just so laughable. Taxes were so reasonable, and heating oil was so reasonable.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, you go to one of the old Sears Roebuck catalogs, and you could order anything.
Yeah. Oh, we were talking about, I think Howard was mentioning these grocery stores. There's so many of them. The first grocery store in Carversville was on Rob Guthrie's property. There's like a guest cottage there.
Yes.
Apparently that was the site of the first general store in Carversville. And
It's quite a substantial
I
building.
own all the ledgers from that store. And they date from 1841 or something through to 1860 something maybe. I forget. There's how many of them? I've got about 4 or 5.
Now, how
five
did you
of them.
come to have those?
They were left at the farm up there in the barn. This is terrible.
What did I get you?
Yeah.
I have a piece of pineapple.
Oh, would that do it?
I don't know.
And I think my stepdad was overseer of that farm when the DeLongs owned it. And I think they said, why don't you clean out this part of the barn or something and get rid of everything?
Good for him.
And they were in a barrel, I think he said. They were down in a grain barrel. And the DeLongs wanted to get rid of everything, so he kept them and gave them to me.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
So
So-
they need to go in an archive somewhere.
They do, but I keep hoping that the Historical Society will have a building they can call their own where you can store things like that. And
Well, the old school building,
Like the Silver
yes,
Historic does.
yes.
But you have a room.
You do. I've seen your room. Yeah.
Yes.
But you need
be in a
a bigger space. You know. I
No,
mean,
we
I
don't
even
have. We need more stuff. We don't have that much to store in there.
it's better to be centrified. All these,
So you think things should be
Doylestown. would be
directed
bad.
towards Silbury?
That's
That's your-
my renegade personal
Okay,
fault.
all right.
I should keep it quiet, but I truly believe
I
it.
don't know. I think that, for me, it has, when it's something from right around here.
Boundaries who have the. Okay.
And misnamed.
Oh dear.
I wrote them a letter.
And
The Corcoran loaned it to a one-man exhibit in Allentown, maybe, at the Allentown Art Museum. And I said, I know that mill, I know that oak tree. And the title was Thompson Neely Mill. And I said, oh my God, no. And so I wrote a letter to the Corcoran.
Did they respond?
No, they did not. I said that the painting is mistitled. I've got a photograph. I have a photograph of that mill. And it's the same
Interesting.
picture, the
They
same
didn't have
view in the
a curious
in the
curator.
painting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And, unless somebody who
Interesting.
once owned the painting had misnamed it, and when
Right.
the Corcoran got it, they just kept the name. I don't know. But it was
Right.
mistitled.
Yeah. Well, I
What
think,
time is it?
Robert, I think we could go on and on with you because your history is so incredible. I mean, your sense of history and knowledge of the various buildings and what happened here. It may be that when we go over this and when you look at this, you can
I don't want to watch it. Please.
No, I was going to say that you can say,
think that's
oh,
what
we
we do."
forgot this whole segment of history of Carversville. But,
Well,
No,
I'm
but you
still
know,
alive, so.
Maybe it would it be of interest or of use to the Historical Society to go one by one up and down the street and you could tell a story about each house?
but you
Well,
did.
I did that,
You
and
did
I
that.
was so glad when we had that
I was not here then.
Oh, you missed it.
Oh, and was it recorded?
No.
No one can find
No,
it.
but they had.
Well, so
I don't know whether it was
repeat it.
Ned Harrington had created the walking tour of Carversville,
Yeah.
and
Oh, I heard
these
some
two
of the-
ladies that were from that architectural organization, I met with them down in the garden by the grocery store here, and they showed me this walking tour, and I said, oh my God, I said, this is full of
Of
conjecture and error.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, can you supply us before this meeting at the church? Could you supply us with corrections? I rewrote the whole damn thing. And,
And
And made a sermon out of it.
and did
did I
they,
make a sermon out of it?
I know, but did they use that?
Yes, they did.
So that should be somewhere.
That should be somewhere.
You don't have a copy.
I don't believe I do.
Oh, Robert.
I
Was
think-
it, who was doing this? Silbury Historical Society?
Mm-mm.
No.
Mm-mm.
No.
No, what was it? The Bucks County
Central
Arch-
Bucks Chamber of Commerce.
Chamber of Commerce. That's right.
Oh.
That's right.
Do you think that they would have?
Possibly.
Well, it's certainly worth contacting them if you know where they are. I know
Oh,
where they used to be.
Well,
but
we have a contact there. We could check
Oh,
it
good.
out. Yeah.
Okay.
It would be worth doing, wouldn't it?
But I think it is a good idea
Yes, it
because
would have.
a lot of the houses, like your own, have
Yeah.
been altered from their original
Oh, my goodness.
appearance.
Yeah.
Dramatically.
Dramatically
Oh,
altered.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do have some pictures of it. But,
The outside of mine is basically the same, except for the entrances have shifted, but
yeah.
they're in the same.
well, because you have a stairway that comes right down to the road where people must have gone in.
Yes.
They must have gotten out of
That's
their
right.
horse and buggy and gone up that front steps there
Mm,
Yeah.
and into a different door.
Yeah.
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 And like you say, you're going to view this and you're going to say, oh, we forgot to cover this, like the normal school. It started out as a normal school and then became a posh kind of summer resort, and then it became a sanitarium, and then it became an orphanage. So there's a lot of history there.
Here's what we can do. We can get in your convertible on a nice day, take the camera, have you in the passenger seat, camera behind you, and you can, stories that come to your head about, oh yes, that house, oh that house, and record them.
That would be a
And
very
yeah, that's
interesting thing to do.
And I'll try to find. I think I have that revised copy. I think they gave me one, but when I married Edie, I had to make room for a lot of her things, and things got moved around, and now I don't know where they are.
Well,
So-
this